Hey there, fellow members of the concrete construction industry. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment to address something important. As professionals in this industry, we understand the challenges we face and the constant need for up-to-date knowledge and valuable insights. That's why we're here, providing you with a podcast that caters specifically to our community. But let's be real. Producing the show requires a significant investment of time, effort, and resources, and that's where we need your support. We're embracing the value for value model, which means we're reaching out to you, our dedicated listeners, to help us sustain and enhance the podcast. Think about the value you gain from our episodes, the practical tips, the industry trends, and the expert interviews. We want to keep delivering that value to you, but we can't do it alone. Instead of interrupting your listening experience with ads or sponsorships, we're relying on your generosity. If you find value in what we do, we kindly ask you to contribute what you can. Your support helps us continue producing high-quality episodes that address the specific challenges and interests of our concrete construction community, from supporting the cost of equipment and hosting fees to bringing in industry experts for exclusive interviews. Your contribution makes it all possible. We understand that every business and individual has different capacities to give, and no amount is too small. Whether it's a one-time donation or a recurring contribution, we appreciate your commitment. By supporting us, you become an essential part of our mission to provide valuable content tailored to our industry's needs. Together, we can elevate our professional knowledge and expertise. So please take a moment to visit our website, concretelogicpodcast.com, where you'll find a donation page that makes supporting us quick and easy. Thank you for being an integral part of our concrete construction community. With your support, we'll continue to build a brighter future for our industry. What is the most used man-made material on Earth? You guessed right. It's concrete. Look around. It's everywhere. Sidewalks, driveways, foundations, floors you stand on, and even entire buildings are made out of concrete. So why don't we discuss it more? In each episode of Concrete Logic, we will explore one concrete-related topic with the help from industry professionals that are shaping the future of the trade. We'll talk with suppliers, contractors, architects, engineers, specialists, and even some proponents of competing materials about their views of concrete and their vision of its future. And welcome to another episode of the Concrete Logic podcast. And today I got two returning guests. I got Keith Robinson and Chris, I'm going to butcher your name, Bennett. And guys, if you could, we'll start with Keith. If you guys could remind our listeners who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff. Maybe where you're from too, because you guys are from different parts of the country, or the continent, I should say.
Yeah, Keith Robinson. I work for DIALOG. We're a company of architects and engineers. We design, everything from commercial, institutional buildings to bridges and other infrastructure. Have a great deal of experience with concrete. My wife always tells me, don't get him started. And here you are, you're getting me started. And it's probably good for a broadcast called Concrete Logic. I am from Edmonton, Alberta, but we have offices all across Canada and in the United States. So I speak from both sides of the border.
Cool. Chris?
Yeah, my name is Chris. I'm the CEO, founder of Bennett Build. We're a Division 03 concrete consultancy and project management team. We help oversee documentation. We help oversee installation to lower budget, reduce schedule, reduce carbon, things like that, and really act as that specialized owner representative to make sure that they're getting what they pay for the first time around, right? So that the rendering looks an awful lot like the final outcome and vice versa. We work all over North America. We don't have as many offices as DIALOG, but we are working on both coasts and up in Canada. And I am headquartered here in Portland, Oregon.
All right. We won't hold that against you, Chris. So, fellas, you guys are coming on today, and I was sharing with you, we just recorded a podcast recently with the polished concrete contractor, and you guys kind of come at a different angle as far as polished concrete. You're consultants. You guys kind of see, from the beginning to the end as far as polished concrete goes, specifying, put in the drawings, design, all that good stuff. And then you get to see the end where Before we hit record, Chris was sharing a story, and you can continue that story about it getting ruined or as folks are moving in. So if you guys want to get a start, Keith, do you want to start us off, or Chris, what you guys want to tackle today as far as polished concrete?
For me, as a specifier, I deal with designers, interior designers and architects that have design vision. We discuss finishes well in advance of projects actually going out for bid and construction, go through the entire process of material selection with our client, the owner of the building's interest in mind. We tell them what the performance attributes are, life cycle costs, all the things that go into making wise decisions when you're spending somebody else's money. And oftentimes we'll arrive at, for appropriate finish on concrete, sustainable, environmentally friendly, durable, resilient, and we, as a design aesthetic, polished concrete is one of those desirable finishes in a sustainable building. Frequently, those decisions are overturned at some point during the construction process, either because the bidder, the successful contractor, didn't award to a concrete polishing outfit. That is, concrete polishing being grinding and treating the surface to bring it up to a high luster with a very fine slip resistant finish. It's environmentally sustainable. We don't put a lot of other materials into the floor. And then we get a substitution request. Can we use a resinous coating, epoxy, polyurethane, polyurea, something which is other than polished concrete, still provides a nice shiny finish, still provides a look that the architect or the interior designer is looking for, who may not understand what they're actually selecting when those materials are offered. And not to take away from resinous coatings, there's a place for those and there's a place for polished concrete. So it's not, something is better than the other. There's just more appropriate locations for both finishes.
So when folks ask for polished concrete, in your experience, do they understand what they're asking for, and why are they asking for it? I guess would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think my sense is they're looking at the end result, which is a nice shiny finish with, which is reflective and highlights the ground finish of the concrete, where you can see aggregate and color pops, kind of like, we'll call it like a rustic terrazzo. The coatings can provide that same appearance. So when an architect or an engineer or an interior designer sees that, they think they're getting the same thing. They don't understand the technical attributes. For myself as a technical person, a material specialist, I would tend to say, well, the resinous coatings would be more suitable in a location where hygiene and cleanliness and the ability to completely seal the floor is a good idea. Say like in a laboratory situation, polyurea, works extremely well in those locations. High traffic areas, not so much, because you got a lot of footfalls. It tends to wear out the finish. It requires maintenance down the road, where polished concrete retains its appearance for far longer and is far less energy and materials intensive to rebuild that finish when it does start to show its age. So apples and oranges, you've got to consider the long-term performance of these things and the actual environments they're being installed in.
Yeah. And Chris, do you agree with what Keith's saying, or is that what you see in your projects? Do folks understand what they're asking for?
Yeah, I would agree with that very much so. I think the aesthetic ultimately, and it's not intentional, but kind of gets in the way of what the owner is usually asking for. A warehouse logistics company isn't saying, gosh, what really is on my mind today? Are our floors shiny enough? That's really been keeping me up at night. They want to know that the rolling loads can, power through that in the abrasive manner, and beat those floors up, and that floor is going to continue to tick. So those floors need to be fully refined. Your retailers have concerns about high traction coefficient of friction. Far, in a way, more important to them is, our slip and fall case studies providing safe walkway surfaces than how shiny something is or isn't. And unfortunately, with a lot of the particularly with what I see down here in the States, is you have a lot of language, benchmark language that's primarily the originated from suppliers, where as long as you're reaching that aesthetic, then it gets defined as polished concrete, whether it actually is or it isn't. And Keith, now this is starting to change. There was kind of a big swing where I would say, most of your major firms unknowingly were specifying substitutions and then defending them with their own documents, particularly if they were only focused on distinctness of image or gloss, sort of these visual sort of benchmarks. But you're starting to see a swing back. Sustainability is a big reason. And Keith mentioned this, with a polished concrete floor. And Tim Blankenship, your guest yesterday, and I had talked about this, that, in my opinion, and I think a lot of others, if you're polishing the physical concrete itself, it's like a degree of refinement. And so the concrete's in a plastic state. And therefore you're using the materials of the slab itself to produce that floor, whether it's an existing slab, certainly if it's brand new, and that the carbon footprint, the energy, the material, the economic cost of using what's already there versus, what's your term, Keith? Doping the floor. I've always liked that one. Doping the floor with other things just because they've got a shiny aesthetic provides a lot of benefit, whether you're counting carbon calories or your checkbook at the end of the month.
Yeah, I think the informal term is shmoo. Put the shmoo on the floor,
Shmoo. The magic shmoo 5,000. Yeah. And it's a big problem too, because with these wider, very, very broad, forgiving definitions, you've got a lot of suppliers that do not have polished concrete systems. And on their box, on their buckets of shmoo, it'll say polished concrete. And so it's kind of like, well, give me a break. How is an interior designer, on top of maybe not necessarily becoming a material scientist, they've got to be aware that even some of the information they're getting, whether it's, malicious or just convenient for marketing, isn't always exactly what they think it is. So it can be a conundrum.
Yeah. And I think that's, you've hit the point there, Chris. And we see this in all materials. And the concrete industry, as we've discussed in the past, Seth, is kind of replete in naming things because of familiarity than by the function that they actually do. We have a whole suite of products for sealer. They call them sealers, surface sealers. We've got cure seals. We've got cure hardeners. We've got densifiers. We've got hardeners. We've got, a whole suite of liquid applied products that, to a person who isn't involved in the concrete industry, can all appear to have very similar outcomes, and nobody really understands what they're used for unless you educate yourself and become more specialized in that knowledge. Fortunately, most of those things are all covered by different ASTM designations, which says a sealer does this, this, and this, which is very different than a cure seal that does this, that, and the other. So you can derive direction through the performance standards associated with the product, but that same performance attribute or performance criteria is not described in a standalone standard for polished concrete, which is why we end up with this. Well, if it's shiny and it looks good and has high reflectance and mirrors the ceiling, then that's the look I'm looking for. Therefore, it is okay. That's what I'm looking for. Not realizing that perhaps you've just added, 10 years from now, a maintenance cost to the owner, which is 3 or 4 times higher than the initial installation cost, not to mention probably 6 to 8 times higher than if they had just gone with the finish that had been intended for that area, which is a part of that manipulative misinformation campaign that Chris was alluding to. Nobody talks about future maintenance. Architecture suffers from a lot of ugly out scenarios in all finishes. Oftentimes where materials are still serviceable, they're replaced just because they've been trafficked and they just don't look as nice as the day they were installed. So something which has a 20 to 25 year lifespan will oftentimes be replaced or overlain with something else, losing, if you like, that carbon contribution of the original finish that was in place, just because it doesn't look good. It wasn't maintained properly, or perhaps it was not appropriate for the location where it was installed.
Yeah. So how do you guys fix that problem as far as or try to at least, as far as making them aware of the maintenance of polished concrete or any other product? You guys are specification gurus. Do you add anything to what you traditionally see in a specification as far as a maintenance program or anything? I know, like, in a traditional spec, there might be some language in there, but usually at the end of a job, a general contractor or a construction manager turns over this big old manual, and it's got the maintenance program, owner's manual, and all that stuff in there. And they hand it over so they can get their retainage. And probably, I would say 9 out of 10 times, those books don't get cracked open until there's some kind of emergency or something. But there's definitely no maintenance program built on an owner's manual that's turned over after a building's complete. Do you Have you guys had success in the past of
Yeah.
getting that in front of the owner and kind of opening their eyes to the real cost of some of these things they're asking for?
Yeah, there's an aspect of specifications writing which is maybe not as common. Most specifications are focused only on the procurement and describing the quality of the material, quality of the execution. And Chris, we take a slightly different approach. We really get involved in the administrative requirements, spell out what meetings have to happen between who, so they can coordinate different parts of the work more effectively. It's almost stepping on the toes of the general contractor who is in control of the work. But in fact, to maintain the quality of materials, quality of workmanship aspect, and the end result that we promised to the owner, the architect really needs to step in and say, we need to have these meetings to make sure that we're actually getting what we design. So administrative requirements, which is a part one requirement for specifications. Specifications are divided into three parts: general kind of administrative stuff, product related stuff, and the execution related stuff. And exactly as you said, Seth, execution can fail entirely the day after the contract is turned over to the owner if there's insufficient training or insufficient transfer of knowledge. So one of the aspects of part one is saying, we need this information. We need these spare materials. We need these spare tools. We go about creating a maintenance program for the owner with those submittals. Part three on execution, something called closeout procedures. We will actually ask the people that installed to run an education session for the owner so that they know how they have hands-on experience on how to maintain those materials. So yes, the specification can help. It can educate as well as define what the performance is.
Yeah, and I've seen people in the past do video recordings of those trainings so they can go back and reference them back. Maybe they put them on YouTube now. I don't know. It's been a while since I've been part of that, but yeah, that's that focus on maintenance. I think is we don't. It's just like concrete. I mean, we push for folks to build with concrete because we believe in the durability of concrete, and it lasts for years and years, and you won't have to replace it. But it's just everyone has such a short-term outlook on things, and they don't think, hey, how much am I going to be spending on this epoxy floor for the next 10, 15 years versus if I just did a polished concrete floor or something like that. In the past, when I built parking garages, used to do a maintenance manual. And in the front of the maintenance manual, we used to do like a Gantt chart, and it said, every 2 years, you need to do this. Every 5 years, you need to do this. Every 10 years, you need to do this, and try to put a dollar amount on it. So that's in front of them, so they understood what that cost was. Something like that. If I think some kind of graphic or something, I think that would help people instead of flipping through, I've seen some of those manuals that they turn over to the owners after a building's done. I mean, it's 6 inches thick. They're not gonna read through that.
It's like your grade 9, health class where they're teaching about human biology, right? They give you the book and they say, go away and read this. And then you're expected to go out and become a responsible adult.
Yeah. The one thing I did want to ask you, we got on a bit of a tangent there on maintenance, but as far as polished concrete, is the hardener application, is that a requirement to do polished concrete? Is that every polished concrete floor, there's some kind of hardener or whatever material put on first and then
Densifier. Yeah, that's essential. You've got to close off the micropores and surface structure of the concrete. You got to kind of get it so that you're not absorbing, and there's different materials, different quantities of the actual reactive components within those products that the specifier or the contract administrator or the architect or the designer needs to be aware of. You want to create the highest percentage of solids to consolidate or densify that surface. So you can get a less expensive product that might require reapplication after 5 years because as it's trafficked, you just wear off that very thin layer of reactivity, or something which has a deep penetration and you can walk on it for 20, 25 years before you need reapplication.
I've seen there was a project with a well-known brand where it was like 2.5, 3 million square feet where they densified, I want to say a total of 4 times before substantial completion because of not having the right tools for the toolbox, so to speak. And so it can be one of those issues, certainly for long-term life cycle and maintenance. But I see it particularly with a lot of your, and densifiers are all mostly water at the end of the day, but the more mostly water they get, the less effective they are, obviously. I also wanted to add in something about designing in the maintenance and starting at initial installation, if I could just real quick, because they're related. One of the things that we certainly don't exclusively do it. A lot of people use surface microtexture measurements, average roughness, RA. We use that for placement and finishing, for polishing, not just because it'll give us some sort of quantitative measure of the smoothness. Are you actually refining the floor or are you just, coating it with schmoo? But because you can set your coefficient of friction maintenance for that. And rather than kind of have guesswork of like, are we still at high traction coefficient of friction? I know that if I'm maintaining, like a 30 to 10 micro inches, that I'm going to be hitting that high traction coefficient of friction. And so I think I think there'll be 2 things that fundamentally change polished concrete. One of them is the safety aspect. It's really hard to program different types of coatings and then maintain coefficient of friction with something that's going to be changing in thickness and texture and things like that. But if you're physically refining the concrete, it's very, very easy to do. And the other one would be that you're getting a lot more finishers these days as people are figuring out how to do polishing underneath their trowels. You're going to get a lot of guys that really understand concrete curing and finishing. And again, ultimately, that's what polishing is a really high level of finishing that understand concrete and understand refinement. Not most, but a large portion of your concrete polishers out there aren't like Tim Blankenship yesterday, where they came from a placement and finishing and a concrete background. A lot of them are Jansan guys. And so that's why you see a lot of polishing mobilizations kind of, at the end of a schedule, because they're installing it, the whole, paradigm for them. And a lot of general contractors is it's a floor coating or covering or something you do to the concrete, not the concrete itself. And so and again, it goes back to what are you trying to do? And it should be serving the client, making sure they've got that durable floor, making sure it's got high traction coefficient of friction, making sure within the aesthetic parameters that's being met for them. And I have found too with RA that it really helps with contingency expenditure, reducing that. We've had a lot of projects where the owner and the bill AEC teams aren't paying any contingency expenditures because we're able to identify substitutions early, or if they sort of happen anyway, the owner isn't the one, on the hook for it, which is, I've never understood that, how the owner cannot be at fault, but ultimately has to pay for things sometimes. It's mind blowing. And so RA is one of those tools, along with coefficient of friction, that
what's
need to
RA?
be average roughness. It's a measure of the surface microtexture of glass, of metal, of concrete. A lot of times in the concrete industry, there's handheld stylus devices, although I know that there are some automated ones, kind of like Zumbas or Roombas or whatever those things are called, that go around and take little measurements. And one of the things that's nice about that is if somebody does have a substitution, if they have sort of coded it, that stylus is still going to give you a quantitative measure of the differences between the peaks and the valleys of the microsurface of concrete. So if it's been fully refined, it's going to be really, really smooth, really smooth. If something has just been sort of, clear coated on top of it, or if maybe there's been a dye introduced to a sealer or densifier component to sort of hide those scratches, your naked eye or even a gloss meter or something like that isn't going to be able to tell you that. So it's a very good quantitative tool to be able to, for project teams to hold on to contingencies, but also, in the longer terms of life cycle and maintaining that floor, not just for hygiene, but also for safety and coefficient of friction.
Gotcha. So that average roughness is specified and there's a purpose for it depending on what type of project it is. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what gives you that dynamic coefficient of friction. And it's funny. It's probably one of the key differences between polished concrete and, say, liquid applied coatings. Very highly reflective concrete is not slippery. It's actually because of the microtexture. It actually has very good slip resistance, where coatings tend to become slippery when they are glossy, particularly when water or snow and ice are present. We actually had a large airport client who had a polished concrete floor, wasn't sure how to clean it, and they were actually using liquid soap, like dishwashing soap, to rinse the floor, and then they wet mop it to clear off the obvious suds. But over time, you built up this soapy film, which then took away from that RA. You could see that the RA had changed because the floor was no longer glossy; it got quite dull. They were thinking the finish was damaged, but they were also having slip fall problems and injury claims. So
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that reminds me of my garage floor. I always yell at my kids if it rains outside and my garage floor, it might be polished. I'm not sure after talking to you guys, but anyways, it looks polished. And yeah, when they come in and their shoes get wet and then they run into the garage and it's just like an ice skating rink. So I always like, guys can't run in the garage if your shoes are wet. But yeah, I never thought of that polished floor. So
Yeah, I'll actually.
one of you guys hit on something earlier where you were saying the timing of when you're supposed to do polished concrete. So yeah, I assume you're supposed to do it at the end after everybody mucks the slab all up after, so the concrete guy goes, yeah. So you come in and you finish the floor, and then the all the electrical trade, the HVAC guy, the insulation guy, he's spraying stuff everywhere, and the floor gets all screwed up, and then the polish guy comes in, he cleans it all up. Isn't that the way you're supposed to do it?
yeah, that's actually
order first to clean it, and then he installs it.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's funny because all those other processes you just named, are detrimental to most finishes that are applied, right? The mechanical guy, plumbing guy, he's in there, he's got pipe cutting oil and all sorts of stuff spilt all over the floor. Electrical guy, they go around with those big, fat, permanent quickie markers, right? They're marking up the floor, and that you can never get rid of that stuff. It just translates its way through whatever finish you put on top of it. In fact, the best time to do it, and the most efficient way, cost-effective way, is to do all that finishing early in the process before you get a lot of encumbrances on the floor, and polish it and then protect it. There are protective things you can put down on the floor. It could be like an adhesive craft paper product. There's liquid products that you can peel and stick on floors. It's a great surface for the people to walk across, protects it from scratches, protects it from all that oil and scratching and
Yeah.
curves. And so it's about the timing.
Yeah. So you do it. How long after the floor is put down? Is it a couple weeks, or how does that work?
There's a lot of other I'll say for me, there's a lot of other criteria that are involved, depending on the actual end use of the floors. We might also require super flat conditions for, certain hospitals or laboratories, which require additional work to the surface of the concrete. Best time to do that is actually before the building is enclosed. The building is complete, but not fully enclosed. So you can go in and you can stage your materials into the building from the side rather than carting up through the building after it's enclosed. Probably the second best time then to do all this material work would be after the building is enclosed, but before all those interior partitions are in place. The worst possible time is to do it exactly as you say, once all the other trades have gone through and you're starting to clean out. Now you've got a lot of hand finishing work around the edges. You can't get the big equipment in. It's far more laborious, far more time consuming, which of course would then drive up the cost and lower the cost advantage of polishing concrete versus putting down a coating, which is probably why coatings get substituted many times, because at that point, perhaps they start to become more competitive to each other.
Right. Yeah. Cause the polished concrete guy shows up and he goes, "This is not what we talked about at the beginning of the job when I quoted it. Now I got to work inside these little rooms and polish and clean up all this mess and everything." Do you guys know what the cost difference is between doing it when I guess when you're supposed to do it and you have to put down whatever protective layer over the top of the concrete? Because that to me sounds expensive, because you got to put it down. There's a cost for that. Then you got to maintain it throughout the project, and then you got to go chase down the trades that damage that and have them pay for.
Yeah.
for
The average
for
cost of an
repairing it.
the average cost of an applied finish is probably somewhere between about $5 to $10 a square foot. Polishing concrete is, depending on how much definition you're looking for, $2 to $3 a square foot. Putting down your protective layers are probably $1 or $2 a square foot.
Okay.
They're not overly expensive. There are products on the marketplace. Do I name a product?
You can.
Scudo, which is the
Yeah.
first one I came across. Scudo is great. It goes down kind of as this pasty kind of liquid. It dries on the concrete surface. It also helps with curing the concrete because it retains moisture. And it's really hard to tear or pull off the floor because it's fully adhered to the floor. But it's kind of like a Post-it note in that way. It adheres well, but when you actually start to pull it off, it peels off very easily and it's very easy to dispose of after the fact.
Okay. So it's like a paper type product.
Kind of like a liquid paper that goes down. They've also got membrane materials. There are other products out there as well. I just can't, they're just not off the top of my head.
Right.
Now.
Huh. That's interesting. So
Yeah.
that's when, so after the concrete contractor places the floor, and then the polish guy comes in, does his thing, and then they protect it before everybody else comes in and trounces all over the top of it. So that's to protect it. Because I was going to ask you guys, I think I talked to Keith about it, and maybe Chris, about the having an allowance for a gap in after the concrete guy's done, and then flooring guy comes in 9 months after and has to deal with what the concrete has done as it's cured over time, and might have to do skim coats or whatever to put the floor down. That's what I was going to ask you guys next, is do you guys recommend allowance for the owner to carry? But it sounds like the owner might not have to if they do it the right way. Is that right?
Largely, yeah. I think the need for allowances of the type that the floor finisher requires are largely reduced, because when you're grinding the concrete for polishing, a lot of that surface movement, due to shrinkage and warpage, has already occurred as well. It's not going to be done 2 weeks after the concrete is being placed. It's going to be done 2 to 3 months, 4 months after the concrete is being placed. So much of that surface irregularity would have to be corrected anyway. At this point, though, instead of being an extra to the actual installation, which would then be covered by the cash allowance, depending on how much it went out, you have to do that preparatory work anyway, so it's built into the cost. So rather than being an extra $3 to $4, after the fact, it's just a part of the finishing and it forms a part of that cost.
Yeah.
Right.
Chris, you had
Well,
something?
when you're polishing, and I know this is going to be controversial maybe to some of the listeners, like number one, there is no dry polishing. This is my opinion. Again, it's, we don't have a lot of contingency payouts. And so I think clear definitions help. I'm not just sort of tooting my own horn here. In fact, there's not a lot of different types of polishing. And if you are actually polishing, it's a wet process. You're returning even an existing slab back into a plastic state. So let's say you've got dry shrinkage crack and you've got pop outs and other little, parts and bad things that you don't like aesthetically, right? Or maybe even that might have serviceability issues. By folding that concrete back into itself, you're just as part of the polishing process. You're already, in most cases, say like eliminating the, 20 to 30 cent a square foot grout coat that's going to match and be more aesthetically pleasing for the owner and the design teams, because the material that you're trying to match those imperfections with is the concrete itself, but it's also an element of speed. And I think, production, particularly with your larger facilities, Seth, you can't just look at a per square foot kind of cost on products and labor. You really need to look at the construction schedule impact. And we were comparing sort of, waiting, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months later to begin that polishing, right? While the concrete's getting all banged up and people are having scissor lift jousting with hammers or whatever else that they do, outside of polishing a floor. But if you can get on a slab like that first day or two to begin your polishing, like the truck leaves, best case scenario, you're polishing 12 to 24 hours later, beginning that process. Or maybe you're removing cement because of low carbon. And so you need to, wait 3 or 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, something like that, depending on how much that you're, taking out. The amount of operational costs from, shedding weeks off of that schedule, you have to start adding up a lot of different figures, maybe construction loans, whatever that percentage is, how much is a week worth to the owner, to the developer, to the GC. All of these things sort of compound. So to really fully appreciate the cost difference between a lot of these substitutions and real true polishing can be really significant once you start to tally everything up together.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that's definitely a different way to look at it. I'm sure there's some listeners there that have been thinking that you do the polishing at the end. I know I did before I talked to you guys. So
Sure.
be interesting to hear from our listeners if they have any experience of doing it. I guess you guys consider the right way of doing it. So, but for today, I think that's a good spot to end the conversation. Keith, if folks want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
They can reach me through my email at DIALOG. It's krobinson@dialogdesign.ca. And I think that'll be in the contact information on your webpage. Yeah, questions. We share specs all the time. So if people want to share, that the price of admission to share is usually you have to share something back. So
Yeah. Yep. And Chris?
Yeah, you can reach me at our website, www.bennettbuild.us, or my personal email is chris@bennettbuild.us.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah. Folks, reach out if you want to talk polished concrete with these guys or specifications or both. Thank you again, you guys, for coming on the show. We'll do it again.
excellent.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
And that concludes another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. I hope you got some value out of that episode and learned a thing or two. If you did, visit our website, concretelogicpodcast.com, click on the show support tab and learn how you could be listed as a producer of an episode. Again, that's concretelogicpodcast.com. Click on Show Support tab to learn how you can support the show. And as always, Mike Dunton will take us out.
Ring, ring, that alarm always sings. Couple hours before the sun comes up. Open up the side, put some diesel in the lights, and wait till the trucks roll up. Yeah, this ain't how most folks live their lives. Dripping in sweat, working overtime. But while they're tying their ties for their 9 to 5s, we're out here changing these skylines with wood, iron, and mud. We work hard for $1, give thanks to the Lord above. Never make a man do something you can't prove. Hard work calls for a drink or two. Expect more, it's real.